So, identity herbalism is the herbalism that relates to who you are. That could be your ethnicity, that could be a region that you're from. It could be something that related to your family. It's something that speaks to your identity. And what I've found is speaking on my own identity herbalism, Japanese and Asian American herbalism, it's a reminder to folks from all walks of life that the cultural connections to the earth are there for all of us.
Hello and welcome to Nourish. My name is Kasha and I'm a holistic life coach and second-year doctoral student studying acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine. My mission with this podcast is to share the stories of inspiring humans who have discovered that elusive state of balance between striving for success and having that sense of interconnectedness and spirituality. Think yin and yang in flow. Now, as a former Silicon Valley burnout escapee myself, teaser, I left the tech world after 11 years of a successful career in product management. I know firsthand how difficult it can be to integrate the two. This podcast shares the stories I wish I had heard when I was struggling to find that balance and flow myself. My hope is that these interviews inspire you and give you the tools to rethink your own approach to mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. And if you are struggling, help you find your way back to authentic alignment. Now sit back, relax, and ground yourself back home, and let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Nourish podcast. I'm your host, Kasha, and I'm so excited to introduce my next guest, Erin Masako Wilkins. Erin is an Asian American herbalist and acupuncturist. She has her master's from the Acupuncture and Integrative Medicine College in Berkeley, California. She's an entrepreneur, the founder and visionary behind Herbfolk Co. Definitely check them out. She teaches classes in Asian American herbalism, folk traditions, Chinese medicine theory, and more. And she's about to be a published author. Whew. This conversation has really been a long time coming. I really wanted to bring someone on who understood both the efficacy of herbs, but also was in touch with the traditions of herbal medicine. There are so many beautiful lineages and lots of history behind the power of plants and herbal medicine. And I'm so excited to get into that on some of the subsequent podcasts. But I really wanted to kick it off with Asian American herbalism, especially since I myself am studying traditional Chinese medicine. That's what's inspiring my knowledge. And I'm really grateful and excited to introduce it to all of you. This episode is loaded with so much information. We cover, of course, what is Asian American herbalism, touch on how it differs from some of the other lineages and traditions of herbal medicine out there. We talk about translating herbal medicine to modern everyday life. If you're listening to this and you're like, Kasha, I don't cook or I struggle with it, I don't even know where to start when it comes to identifying herbs because we're so disconnected from nature and the world that we live in. Don't worry, I'm right there with you. That's really what's inspiring this conversation, quite frankly. Even though I'm taking herbal classes, it can still feel so overwhelming. And then we talk about herbal medicine and herbal traditions as a means to connect to your lineage. Erin has a really unique perspective on this, so I'm really excited to share that with you all. And so much more. Consider this your introductory podcast on the topic of herbal medicine. And without further ado, let's jump right on in and welcome the incredible Erin Masako Wilkins to the Nourish podcast. Welcome, Erin.
Hi, Kasha. Thank you so much for having me.
Such a relaxed response. I'm like literally grinning ear to ear here. So excited for this. For those out there who don't know, this has literally been months coming because Erin over here has a very busy life, which we're going to get into with lots of exciting things coming down the pipeline. So we had to book like pretty much 6 months out almost, right?
Yeah. when we spoke on the phone, there was just such an instant connection and chemistry. I knew I wanted to do this with you. And so we made it happen.
I have to ask this question. If you were a plant, what plant would you be?
This feels like an important question.
I feel like it's very important.
If I was a plant, I would most definitely be chrysanthemum, not just because it's my favorite medicinal, but because chrysanthemum is soft and feminine and healing. And yet there is an understated resilience to it, meaning if you were to pick it, to cut its head off, it would come back twice as strong.
I love that. Oh, and I knew you were going to say that. Isn't that weird? I don't even know that many herbs, but I thought that one in my head. Wow. Okay. All right. She's spoken.
I'm telling you, we have a connection.
All right. So, Erin, I'm reading through this like quick bio already, just like preparing my mouth to go for it. But you are, I mean, your portfolio, your resume, your experience is loaded. You're an Asian American herbalist and acupuncturist with your master's from the Acupuncture and Integrative Medicine College in Berkeley, California. You are an entrepreneur, founder of the beautiful Herb Folk Co. So everyone, if you're by a computer, please definitely go check it out. I mean, that page just drew me in. You teach classes in Asian American herbalism and folk traditions, Chinese medical theory, seasonal wellness, and community care. And you're about to be a published author. Oh, and you're a mom, by the way. Had to throw that in there.
Mom of two, yeah.
Mom of two. Oh my gosh, that is loaded. And I really want to actually start at the beginning because it's interesting, but as I kind of go through this high-level bio, one of the things that I didn't even call out that I know is huge because you've talked about it on other interviews that you've had, like on the Martha Stewart interview that you held, you really talked about how important your own background and heritage is in really defining the work that you do, who you are, and how you identify. And we talked about how to introduce you at the beginning. And, I love that you've started to include Masako back into your name to make that explicit. And so can you share a little bit about your background, being born to a Japanese mother and a white father, and having that have such a heavy influence on your path, and how perhaps that's influenced your kind of background and your roots in herbal medicine?
Where to start? I am currently practicing and living in Sonoma County, California. And my family, my mother's family, the Japanese side, has lived here for 5 generations, except for the generation and a half when we were, as a family, displaced due to the forced incarceration of Japanese Americans. There was that generation and a half where we were elsewhere was Sacramento. So that's where I grew up. Grew up in Sacramento, surrounded by a lot of family, Japanese family, Irish family, and my identity was not something that I really talked about. It just was. And so even when I joined AIMC, the graduate program, I didn't join as an Asian American herbalist. I joined as Erin. And through that work in grad school, through my clinical work over the years, becoming a mother, all of these things started to integrate with my identity and the work that I was doing. And I really found my voice in connecting those two.
So, and that is just so beautiful how your path, in a way, your path forward in life ties back to your history. I think that's just such a beautiful way to link all parts of yourself. So I'm curious, you are an Asian American herbalist. You are, I guess, one of many things, but that is absolutely a focal point in your life. Can you start by defining what that is for people, both Asian American herbalism and just herbalism in general? Because I think that there are a lot of misconceptions about what that is.
Yeah, I love that question because language holds so much power in our day-to-day life, and even more so in how we speak of ourselves, how we identify. And so for the first 10 years of my career as a Japanese acupuncturist and an herbalist, I always called myself an East-West herbalist. I didn't put too much thought into it. I really labeled myself that way because I thought it was just a really intuitive, common sense label. East West herbalism. I do Western, I do Eastern. It's a little of both. And then it was summer of 2020. We were all in lockdown. It was the first time in my life that I wasn't working, hustling nonstop. And it was in light of BLM and the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. And I think, like everyone, like most people, I was doing a lot of soul searching and digging deep internally. And what I realized within that time was I don't even really feel the paradigm of East West. I don't believe herbalism is either Eastern or Western. What came through was that how I practice and how I identify personally is as an Asian American herbalist, because the work I'm doing, and I think many folks, whether they have Asian heritage or not, we're not practicing classical or traditional Chinese medicine or Asian medicine here in the States. We're learning it through teachers who are teaching it to us in English primarily and within a modern framework. The context is, right, in California, it's modern day California. So those words really spoke to me professionally, but really more importantly, personally.
I appreciate you sharing also kind of that personal touch that came out of this really trying time for you and for so many people in the world. I'm curious how, first of all, like, let's start at the foundation of herbalism. Who is an herbalist? What do they practice? Just to kind of level set for people out there who are completely unfamiliar. They may be associated with, I don't know, like magic. What exactly is herbalism?
I would say at the highest level, to your point, herbalism is magic. Herbalism is alchemy going back thousands of years, whether it's in Europe, Asia, all over the world. A lot of the most valuable tonic herbs to build energy, to restore youthful vitality, those herbs were discovered by people who were looking to live forever, right? Or cure diseases that they were not understood with modern science. But really, day to day, herbalism is what we do in our kitchens. It's the work that we do in our gardens. It's how we cultivate wellness with everyday foods and with a little bit of knowledge incorporating different herbs.
So I want to push on this a little bit, speaking from my experience right now, but also Kasha from a year ago. It can be very overwhelming. And I think a lot of our population right now is completely disconnected from the plant life around them. It's even for me, I've already taken 2 semesters of herbal theory, like intro, and then now herbs. I'm in herbs 1 right now. And it can be difficult to identify plants, understand any of their properties and values. And so when it comes to herbal medicine and it comes to healing with herbs, and maybe we can approach it. Actually, I'll have you define from what perspective are you viewing it? Traditional Chinese medicine, that training that you received there, or Asian American herbalism, kind of maybe a broader perspective. When we think about herbalism as a tool to heal, how do we approach healing with herbs? Like, how do herbalists think about healing? You mentioned they're in the kitchen. There's this element of alchemy, but is it any plant can be healing? Is it that there are certain plants that are healing? Does it differ between traditional Chinese medicine and Japanese medicine or Japanese herbalism? And please correct me also if I'm defining it incorrectly.
To me, the difference between classical or traditional Chinese medicine and what I call Asian American herbalism would be that how I learned TCM was a lot about diagnosing illness. How do we heal sickness, whether it's a basic cold and flu or an infection, long-term disease? Asian American herbalism, I find to be more about how to cultivate wellness, how to feel better in our day-to-day life, improve energy, improve sleep, feel less emotional strain. And what I would suggest for what you're asking is going into your own kitchen and noticing, what are you drawn to? What do you drink in the morning? What foods kind of do you have on rotation regularly? And so for me, that was For an example, green tea. I grew up watching my grandma drink Jamae Cha green tea. I drink it every day. And when I was in grad school, AIMC, in the big textbook, the big herbal textbook, green tea is in there as a medicinal. And that was one of those light bulb moments for me of realizing, wow, the medicine can be as simple as the things that we have already in our kitchen. Another great example is ginger. Right? Some people are really drawn to ginger, and it's a warming herb. And I've found that people who love ginger, like if you love ginger, it's likely that you also run a little cold, right? Like the body is generally drawn to the plants and the herbs that it needs.
That's beautiful. I recall a professor in my intro to herbs actually calling out as we were like working to identify some of the common herbs that are found here in Northern California. She mentioned, a lot of the herbs that perhaps might be good for you are the ones that are found like right on your doorstep. Like they seem to be found near you. And I don't know if that resonates at all, but you speaking to how people can be drawn to herbs makes me think of that.
Absolutely. And, I am a clinical herbalist. I came up learning from teachers in herb clinic with little drawers with hundreds of different dried herbs. There can be a misconception that all herbalists have these wild gardens and, acres of plants growing. That was not my reality. And just recently in the last 5 years, I started just putting a few plants in my yard every year and seeing what takes off, what comes back year to year. And it is the herbs that I need that remain. It's fascinating. I love that.
So before I bring us back to the different kind of histories that might be associated with different lineages of herbalism, because I'm so curious about that. So I promise the listeners we'll get there. I do want to ask, because you mentioned, think back to the things that you consume day to day, what you're drawn to. Some of these things perhaps are addictive. And so I would love to hear your thoughts on caffeine. Is caffeine considered an herb? And if we say, okay, or is it something that is, how would you even define? I mean, we know that the roots of caffeine come from a plant, right? But is that something that you would find in a medicinal herbalist's kitchen or cupboard? Or is it something that is prescribed? Like in coffee, perhaps caffeine. Yeah.
Great question. And we'll focus on coffee, but whether we're talking about coffee, cannabis, alcohol, I think the big question is, what are the energetics? What are these substances doing in the body, even without judgment? Just what is the movement within the body, the shift in the body? And for caffeine and coffee, what I find is that it moves energy or chi. It's very invigorating and it can lift energy. So I'm a coffee drinker. I don't prescribe coffee, but I'm a coffee drinker. And I don't drink it to get an adrenaline rush. I drink coffee to lift my spirits and to kind of get my energy and circulation flowing. And I have a feeling that that's shared by other people too, whether they are conscious of it or not. I have a feeling that that is a big part of coffee culture, is feeling uplifted.
So when we say that we are drawn to a particular plant or the energetics, let's say, of a plant, how much does addiction play in here, right? Because there is, and there have been studies to show that coffee can be physiologically addictive. People start to kind of rely on it for that energy. And so I guess the reason why I'm asking this question is, how much do the things that we assume, like things that we consume perpetuate the herbs that we need, so to speak, versus we inherently, the way that we are, like our bodies are drawn to, let's say, dandelion root versus coffee, right? So like how much of the addictive qualities are really kind of energetically needed by us versus, and should be considered like a natural state of need versus something that we should be concerned about, like coffee being addictive?
Gosh, that's a great question. And I think it again goes back to the energetics. Is something benefiting your life, or is it taking away from your quality of life? I think that's the main question here, because people who drink coffee every day, maybe that's the only drink other than like water, say that they're getting. There's also a social component to that, right? We're not going to cafes and having dandelion root tea, which would be dope, but that's not really a thing.
We should do that.
We we should totally do that. So I think that's also exposure. There's knowledge, and that's a big part of why I moved from clinical acupuncture practice to teaching seasonal workshops and teaching online was really about access because you can find anything on Google. It's so much information. It's no information, right? But with a little bit of really specific, meaningful knowledge that can really like change things for someone.
I love that you call out the energetics and also how it's affecting your life because that term everything in moderation, I mean, it's so cliche, but it's kind of true, right? Like if coffee when you're on vacation and well rested just feels amazing, but if you're just running on adrenaline and you're running on fumes and you're drinking it and now you have anxiety, it's just such a different experience. Same kind of substance, right?
Absolutely. And I think another important thing to call out too is our culture, the hustle culture, the grind, the 9 to 5. People are suffering big in ways big and small. And so when I'm working in clinic with somebody, I will ask them often, "Oh, do you drink coffee?" And many people will immediately, I can see, feel judged. "Oh, well, I do, but only 2 cups a day." And my response to that is, I'm not here to tell you to stop drinking coffee, but if that is something that you do every day, let's add some powdered herbs to it. Let's doctor it up and make it special and make it a source of healing in your life.
I love that. And, that segues very well into the question that I have, which is I want to really give people a feel for how you think as an herbalist, right? And I love how you mentioned the balancing out of the coffee. So when it comes to introducing people to, quote, thinking like an herbalist, and obviously this is like a tiny little bit of all the knowledge that you have, but when you think about concoctions or tinctures or clinically helping to balance somebody out, how do you approach your thought process around, okay, these are the herbs that you need? Can you walk us through the thought process around balance? Like, maybe you can give us a few examples of maybe the types of people that you see and how you approach prescribing, or I don't know if prescribing is the right word, but recommending a set of herbs, et cetera.
Okay, Kasha, I love this question. How does an herbalist go about giving advice?
Yeah.
So what I see is that one of the most important jobs of an herbalist is listening to someone's story. And that's how I start out each session, is really inviting someone, I'm going to ask you a lot of questions, but to start, I would like you to just tell me why you're here and more about yourself. And then as they're talking, really listening and noticing the patterns. Noticing if this person has a lot of heat versus cold. Do they even just simply run cold versus feel hot? Simple as that.
How would you define like heat in a person? Because what is it the way that they're speaking? Can you kind of define that for folks who don't know?
So because you are in Chinese medicine school, we could go deep, right?
We don't have to go very deep, just high level, right?
Let's just say simply for somebody listening, if you just feel hot, do you run hot? Are you that person who's always taking off the sweatshirt? Somebody who has night sweats? Somebody who tends to get really hot and red in the face or eyes? That's heat. So noticing that. The other piece that I like to recognize in someone is if they're deficient or excess. What does that mean? So a deficient person is somebody who is a little weaker. Somebody who might always be tired, no matter how much sleep they get. They have a low appetite. Even the voice might be really soft and difficult to talk loud. Somebody who's excess is robust. They likely are very tense and they just have an energy that is big. So I tune on those things: hot, cold, deficiency, excess. And then when I get a sense of their energy, I ask the lifestyle questions like, do you drink coffee? Do you like to cook for yourself? Do you drink tea? To see what are the ways that this person can really easily bring herbs into their life somebody who's very busy, immediately I think tinctures and pills. They're not going to be cooking bone broth for themselves, right? People who drink coffee, let's put some powdered extracts in there. People who cook for themselves, oh, we can put roots and mushrooms and herbs into your daily food. And then for the person who's down for herbal tea, I mean, that's where it becomes really fun.
I think that's a very good kind of overview with also, I appreciate how you not just are looking at, okay, let's think about how can we balance out this person energetically, almost like kind of if they're skew in one direction, it sounds like you want to kind of bring them back to more of that center, like in the opposite direction. But it also sounds like you're considering lifestyle consumption. How do you think about when you're considering, not just the ways that they can consume the herbs, but how does, in terms of types of herbs, how does location make a difference, right? Like you typically work with people who are in the California area, but since you are going to be a published author, you're going to be speaking to all of these people all around the globe. And so I'm curious, does location of where the plants are coming from, does that make a difference? Is that something that should be factored in as people think about what plants to work with?
That's a great question. At a high level, yes. The herbs and the plants that grow where you live share a resonance with you. And that is, we just think about it, common sense. Thousands of years ago, people were consuming the plants and foods and herbs that they had in their small region. However, and I speak about this in the book, that's not always accessible for people in modern day, people who are living in cities and areas where they don't necessarily have access to even a yard, let alone a garden. So I think it's important for that. So I think locally sourced herbs is important for health reasons. I think it's also important to consider for the environment. There's a huge carbon footprint with importing herbs, shipping herbs from overseas. And so there's a lot of considerations. I'm a fanatic about locally sourced herbs, but I also am cautious and mindful about making it sound like that's the best way or the only way. The best way is the way that works for you.
So speaking of location, I think I would be remiss to not kind of inquire about the fact that there are multiple lineages of herbalism, right? Like we're in North America. There's history that goes back here in terms of people who would practice herbalism as there's this beautiful history of East Asian medicine and Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine in the form of herbalism as well, and Japanese herbalism. Can you share a bit about the differences between kind of Western herbalism versus, and I don't know if you want to bucket them together, maybe even want to split them out, but East Asian or specifically Chinese herbalism versus Japanese herbalism? And this can just be either philosophy or, how do you view it as an herbalist who is familiar almost with like all of the styles, right?
As I was writing my upcoming book, Asian American Herbalism, I started to do more research than I ever had. Well, what is Asian herbalism beyond Chinese medicine, and Japanese herbalism, which is what I learned in school. And it is so diverse. It was humbling to see after hours of research, days of research, I still have a lot to learn. What I did find is Asian herbalism as a whole goes back to food as medicine. We look at all the places, East Asia, Central Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia. A lot of the herbs of those regions are things you would find in the kitchen: basils, cardamoms, ginger. And so that's one part of it. Speaking to the difference between Chinese medicine versus, say, North American or Western herbalism. Western herbalism focuses a lot on simplers or single herbs, like peppermint tea, chamomile tea. Chinese medicine, TCM, tends to focus more on formulas, whether that's just 2 herbs like goji berry and chrysanthemum, or a complex formula with 15 herbs. It's more relational with how the plants work together.
So it sounds like Western herbalism focuses more on those singular herbs. East Asian medicine or Chinese medicine especially focuses on formula, and in general, East Asian medicine really incorporates it into food and the meals that you're eating. I'm curious, how about the types of herbs? As you know, you're kind of now based in Northern California. How and you're practicing Asian American medicine or herbalism. Do you import a lot of the herbs that you work with? Do you find that they're also local to California? Is there some overlap, or are there also a lot of differences in terms of the herbs that are available here versus in Asia?
So, especially for the first decade of practice, I imported nearly all of my herbs, all of the herbs from China. And then, with some confidence and some years of experience under my belt, I started to source herbs locally and consider, what are the energetics of these herbs? How can I prioritize using local herbs? So something like chrysanthemum. We learn about that in school as an herb to release the exterior, which means to treat cold and flu. And it does do that. But a secondary function is that it moves qi. And it's really great for alleviating symptoms of stress, headache, tension, irritability. And so I find, gosh, we can easily find chrysanthemum in California. So a great way to treat stress with a simple chrysanthemum tea.
I love that. So there is an opportunity, I think, and I guess I speak to also some of the lectures that I had that I find so fascinating how, in Asia, North America in general has so many different climates, and there's a lot of overlap with some of the climates that you see in China, in Asia in general. And so I was just curious if the philosophies between the different lineages of herbalism were different, and like, how are they different? Because it does sound like there is a lot of overlap, as you just mentioned, in the herbs themselves. So it sounds like, there is an opportunity to also consume the Asian herbs overall in the North American region, which I think is great.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And person comes to mind. Her name is Peg Schaefer. She has a Chinese medicinal herb farm, actually here in Petaluma, where I am too. And she has really championed the idea of domestically grown Asian herbs. And a big piece of her work is noting the bioregions in Asia and China, which is huge, what herbs grow in those regions, and then what regions in the United States closely resemble that. What soil, right? And what regions can grow Asian herbs. Because in California, we can't grow everything. Very specific.
I think that's so important because there is something about the plants that are grown near you. They do have that energetic component, as you mentioned. Also fresh plants in general taste so much better. I'm speaking about kales, and I think that applies to herbs as well. So I think that's so important. So that actually brings me to another question around energetics. And you use this word several times. And I find it interesting because when we were talking about coffee and caffeine, you mentioned it's very energizing, it moves energy. And then when you were talking about chrysanthemum, which if anybody has not seen what it looks like, highly encourage you to go Google it. I've seen it here locally in the Bay Area. It's a very beautiful plant. You also mentioned that chrysanthemum moves energy. As somebody who has consumed both of these plants, I guess, in a tea or beverage form, I know that the way that I feel is just very different. And so can you speak to that a little bit? Like, what exactly, like, what kind of further segmentation is taking place, right? Like, you have coffee energizing, moves chi. You have chrysanthemum, where it also moves chi, but the energetics and the way that you feel afterwards feels so different. From an herbalist's point of view, how do you view these two plants that have some overlap in function, yet make you feel so differently?
Yeah, you're really getting to the heart of more complex herbalism, where every plant, every herb has energetics, and some are very subtle, some are very strong, whether that is just the biology, the chemistry of the plant, or whether that's how it's been kind of developed and grown over the years. And so as an herbalist, part of the magic is matching the right plant for the person. Some people really benefit from coffee. Others, it's much too strong.
So almost like perfume takes on a different scent depending on who's wearing it. Does that happen with, I guess, the plants as they're consumed as well?
It does. Yeah. That all goes back to chemistry.
Well, I think that's really helpful. I wonder also if lifestyle has a factor in that as well, because I notice, at least for myself, I'm somebody, I've talked about this publicly, skew anxious. Coffee for me feels great, energizing, and almost, just the right dose of energy if I'm on a vacation in Italy. The second that I come back here and I'm in my day to day, I have to cut back. Like it's just too much. And also, quite frankly, if I'm getting enough sleep, I actually feel almost like revolted by consuming coffee. Like it makes me jittery. But if I feel like sleep deprived, consuming it just makes me feel awake, which I find so interesting that it's the same cup of coffee, same amount, but depending on my circumstances, the way that I'm feeling, even my surroundings, the way it hits me is different. So I think I'm wondering, if that, it sounds like that applies to all different kinds of plants as well.
Gosh, that's such a great example because that espresso in Italy hits different. There is a part of that, or I don't know. I don't know if any of us really know. That is those kind of magical, kind of energetic lifestyle components to herbalism.
100%. So, okay. One of the things, and I kind of spoke to this at the beginning, but herbalism really feels, and I know this might be difficult for you, Erin, to imagine having all your experience, but it truly feels overwhelming. Like the act of growing plants for me, I don't have a green thumb. I mean, it's a miracle that my spider plant is still alive. Like I'm really trying here, but it can be a struggle. The idea of growing, figuring out what plants to bring into my kitchen, right? Like I guess basil's one I'm familiar with. So that's like a very easy example. Goes into pasta, tastes very great. But there are so many herbs out there. And one of the things that you speak to is translating herbs in general and Asian American herbalism to the modern world and to make it a bit more available for people day to day. And so I'm curious, what are some of the tools, tricks, kind of approaches that you recommend people take to figure out, like what herbs should I be consuming in general? And how can I remove that feeling of intimidation around bringing those into my life? Like how do you recommend people get in touch with plant life and herbs around them?
So two things come forward. One is if somebody's feeling intimidated about herbalism, best thing that you can do is look into where your local herb shop is or health food store, but better yet, an herb shop, and take a class. If you can, in person, be in community, be physically with other people learning. And I find it removes some of that intimidation and it brings forward so much inspiration and even fun, because that's what it should be. And then there's one herb that I tell people, if you're going to grow a fresh herb, just one even on a balcony or on a windowsill, the herb that I tell people you have to take fresh is lemon balm. Lemon balm is in the mint family, so it's really hardy. It's pretty, like even I can grow lemon balm and it comes back every year. I don't have to replant it. And when it's fresh, it has a little lemon scent, a little lemon flavor. And you can just put a stem or a few leaves into your drinking water and drink it throughout the day. It infuses and it is anti-anxiety. It is a soothing, chill, mellow herb. And who doesn't need that? Who doesn't need to feel more ease in their day? So lemon balm is it. It's also an antiviral and kind of helps to offset the effects of radiations. Like if you are traveling on a plane, it's a big hit of radiation. Lemon balm water or tea is really nice to counterbalance the effects.
I love that. How about the element of using our herbal roots, for lack of a better word, to connect to our heritage? Because I know this is something that you've done so beautifully. You talk about identity herbalism. Can you introduce this concept to folks? Because I think that also could be an interesting way of connecting to herbs, but also connecting to your own heritage and roots.
Yeah, so identity herbalism is the herbalism that relates to who you are. That could be your ethnicity, that could be a region that you're from. It could be something that related to your family. It's something that speaks to your identity. And what I've found is speaking on my own identity herbalism, Japanese and Asian American herbalism, it's a reminder to folks from all walks of life that the cultural connections to the earth are there for all of us to share. And I believe that there are lessons to be learned from our own identity herbalism and from learning about others as well.
And for people who are just getting into it, do you have any resources that they could look for? Because I think it's so beautiful that Asian American heritage is really coming to the forefront, and there's been this kind of revival. But for a lot of people, these lineages and learning about the plant medicines perhaps that their ancestors worked with, those can be really hard to find. So as you began your journey, what did you do to learn more about it? Or were there, did you look for specific books, groups? Like, what can be helpful there?
Goodness, I did do a lot of research of the indigenous Asian herbal traditions. And what I found, and I assume this is going to be across the board, is there is such a history of colonialism globally that a lot of the indigenous traditions are really difficult to access, to find, at least online. And so a big thing that came forward for me is how important it is. If you're into identity herbalism, whether your family is from Asia, Europe, South America, wherever, there's a really rich opportunity to collect that knowledge, to preserve that knowledge. For somebody who is really wanting to maybe become an herbalist, maybe go to herb school, there are some really great herb schools who focusing in on ancestral herbalism of one's ancestors. And the two in the Bay Area that come to mind are Ancestral Apothecary and the Scarlet Sage Herb School, or it's now called Verse within the Scarlet Sage Herb Company.
I think those are beautiful resources because it can be so hard to even trace that back. I mean, I am Polish, and I was telling my mom about the herbs that I'm learning, and out of nowhere, she tells me about some long lost aunt who has like a huge herb garden somewhere in Poland, and like the herbs that they were using, when she was growing up. And I feel so fortunate that I can ask some of those questions for her. And there is something that kind of feels like coming home a bit to like learn about that. And so I love that you've, no pun intended, but you've identified that as a interesting route to use to also explore herbs for you personally. Okay, I could keep going. I have so many questions, but we're kind of running up on time here. So I would love for people to know, how can they find you? And also, can you share a little bit about some of the exciting things that you have coming up for you so folks know what to look out for?
Absolutely. So all of my adventures, offerings, exciting moments are on my website, herbfolkshop.com. I have a product line of herbal teas, green tea blends, broth herbs, holistic goods. And I also will put like workshops and classes that I have on the website. And then the big thing is next year, I have my first book coming out, Asian American Herbalism, next fall. And I'm in the process right now of kind of finalizing the first draft, and it's so exciting. So I'm really looking forward to building community around that body of work. So if you're interested, find me at herbfolkshop.com. Let's connect.
And of course, I'm going to link everything in the show notes below. Erin, it was such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for tackling really our introduction to herbs here, because this is the first podcast that I've hosted. I was waiting for you to come on to really start to introduce herbalism, give people a taste, and really debunk some of the mystery around it, because I think it can be so deeply intimidating. It still is for me, and I'm taking hours of courses on herbs. So I can only imagine how folks out there must feel when they, I don't know, open a book from the library and they're like, what do I do with this? So thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you, Kasha, and keep using your voice. And really, I see you putting out content that is meant to help people heal and feel better in their bodies. And I just really honor your work.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for listening. See you next time. Hello, incredible humans. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Nourish. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider leaving a review or sharing it with a friend. Reviews really help this podcast grow and reach a larger audience, and I'm so grateful for that. I publish new episodes twice a month, so hit the subscribe button to be notified. And if you'd like to learn more about the work I do as a holistic life coach or to connect, please check out the show notes or find me on Instagram at Mira_wellness_co. See you next time.